Good morning from ICANN58 in Copenhagen. We're here with Dr. Steve Crocker and Göran Marby. Steve, what do you think were the key issues discussed in the meeting and the key takeaways?
A lot of focus on issues. Work stream 2, of course, is now getting attention now that we're past the transition and trying to get into the next phase of the things that weren't part of the transition. There was also a focus on the auction funds, which I'm glad to see the cross-community working group on that process is cranked up and working now. In general, it's business as usual, pretty much, if one can ever say that about ICANN.
You are in your first ICANN meeting was nearly a year ago. What are some of the key things you've learned during that time?
There was much more about people than I knew. This year's been, for me personally, a fantastic transition as well. With this meeting, I think it's safe to say I know what I don't know. And I had a lot of things to learn. I'm very deeply impressed about the level of commitment and passion in the community with all the people. It's fair to say that the internet users of the world should be deeply gratitude to all the people who come to an ICANN meeting and other meetings around the internet space.
Göran, and you've also talked a lot about transparency and accountability this week. What are your next steps as you continue to focus on improving both for the ICANN org?
Well, recently we added the complaint officer. We now have the new reports coming out. Today, first day, we're doing the first open session with me and the executive team. There's going to be continuous involvement about it, but it also has to happen in a dialogue with the community. It is very important transparency is followed by a narrative, so people have the potential to understand. It's not only about putting out more new materials.
Steve, this is the second meeting since the completion of the IANA stewardship transition. How has ICANN evolved since that milestone?
The evolution is in progress, so it's not all of it's happened, at once. We have taken the transition very seriously, and by that I mean not only have we adopted the bylaws and made the structural changes, but we are now working through how to make each and every part of that real. What do we have to do to breathe life into all of the things that were done? So, for example, Göran mentioned transparency. From the board's perspective, we're looking at that along two lines. One is overall transparency of the organization, making information available, what are the processes to put inside to do that. And then from the board's own activity, we've opened up some of our meetings this time and are gradually looking at how we can do that without hobbling ourselves for the things that we need to do behind closed doors. But we genuinely want every single part of the new bylaws and the empowered community and all of that to work. And there's a lot of details to be filled in.
This meeting saw some intense discussions surrounding the reviews of the new generic top-level domain program. What needs to happen before the next round is launched?
That's a question, of course, that's been asked multiple times in multiple different ways. It isn't 100% clear exactly what needs to be done, so it's a little bit worse than here's the list and we'll do that and then we're on our way. But it's clear there's pressure to move forward. The consumer trust, choice, and competition project review process has been going forward, and they now have a draft report, and we looked at that, and that's one of the major pieces. There's questions about security and stability. There's questions about community applications and trying to look at where some of the rough edges were of the previous round. There's even questions whether there should be a round per se or whether the door should just be opened on a continuous basis. So all those things are getting looked at. We can't afford to just plunge into the next phase without having some clarity about all these things. And at the same time, we do, in fact, recognize quite a lot of pressure, both from individuals and companies that are eager to do, but also from the general environment that if we wait too long, then we really compromise the whole process. So we're proceeding as quickly as we know how.
And following up on that, do you have a sense of how well the internationalized domain names have done?
The internationalized domain names have been one of the big successes, in my opinion. at a couple of different levels. First of all, from a symbolic point of view, it makes the statement very clear that ICANN, the internet community, are intending to serve the entire world and not just be US-centric, Western-centric, and so forth. And I think that's crucial. And internationalized domain names are just one small piece of that, but it's a specific piece that makes that case. And then you say, well, that's fine from a general principle point of view. How is it actually working out? Some of them are working out very well. I don't have the statistics to quote to you on the spot, but I think a number of them are doing quite well indeed.
And Göran, so what's next for ICANN?
Well, the community sets the, and I really truly mean that, sets the discussion going forward. What I'm thinking that we need to be better at, in my budget discussion with the board, I said that this fiscal year coming up is really business as usual, but we need to plan for the future. And we see 3 different areas where we have to start finding a format for discussions with the community and the board. The first one I call financial planning. We need to continue to evolve and discuss with each other how we should prioritize the resources we have to make sure that we get the best bang for the buck. And that is a little bit more long term than just talking about next year's budget. The other thing we started here is really about some of the underpinnings of the multi-stakeholder model, where we're looking into how the processes works, not to define if they work or not, but increase the transparency about the processes so people know where they are in the process, for instance. The third thing I personally think is not to forget, and that is the technical evolution. The next billion users of internet will come in the mobile space without any effect. How can we evolve and how can we have that discussion in a positive way within our mission, but make sure that we always progress ourselves to something that is better. So I think that over the next, besides all the policy discussions, besides everything else, to find that format, I think it's going to be very important for us going forward.
I've had the privilege of being chair for several years and being on the board for several years more. Each of the things that Göran has just talked about, financial planning that looks years ahead, taking into account the technological changes, trying to make the business processes, if you will, more transparent and evident, and in the process maybe we'll make some of them a bit more efficient, have been things that, from my perspective, I have wanted to see for a long time. We have been, up until the transition, under a lot of pressure on very urgent near-term issues, the transition and before that the GTLD program and so forth. So I'm just absolutely delighted that we now have those issues rising to the top and that we have the time and the resources to look at that. So I'm just extremely optimistic.
And for both of you, what should we expect in ICANN59 in Johannesburg?
It's a shorter meeting. It's the policy meeting, so even more issue-based. Personally, we're also starting to bring in the discussion about the flow charts of the processes. We're going to engage with the community. Technical discussions, we talked about other things, and we're going to, when we speak to the community, sets the scheduling for the meeting, and we will continue that discussion. And
Steve, what from your perspective?
Well, Göran mentions it's a policy meeting, it's a shorter meeting. So what we have to fess up and say is the meeting strategy that was created a couple of years ago and put in place, and we're now in the second year of it, was intended to reduce the size of some of the meetings and so on. At the same time, the number of issues has increased, and people have been tacking on meetings beforehand, and it's probably needs to be looked at again. And I'm sort of holding my breath to see how much pressure we're going to have for this shorter meeting to be longer and longer outside the bounds of it.
Finally, Steve, how have you found Copenhagen since your last visit in '69?
Well, it is absolutely a delight to be here. The sad fact is that I don't have much time to explore, but what little I've seen has been. I had wanted to make it a bit of a family vacation and it didn't work out, but although the weather has been cooperative for Copenhagen, in that it's not snowing and yucky out, I think I want to come back when it's a little bit warmer, bring my wife, and do a much more thorough exploration.
Thank you both for your time today, and looking forward to seeing you in Johannesburg at ICANN 59.